Imagine falling off a warship. Not in a Hollywood movie, but in real life. In the middle of the Vietnam War, you're stranded in enemy waters with no weapons, no radio, no clue what's next. And then you get captured, tortured, and pretend to be stupid, so convincingly that your captors let you wander around freely. Sounds like a ridiculous movie plot, right? But this isn't fiction. This is the real story of Doug Hegdahl. Man who played dumb to outsmart a war camp, memorized the identities of over 250 fellow prisoners of war, and delivered critical intelligence to the US government. And he did it all while pretending not to read. Honestly, who says acting dumb doesn't pay off? In the mid-1960s, the Vietnam War was escalating like wildfire. The US had signed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and the USS Canberra, an advanced guided missile cruiser, was patrolling hostile waters near the Vietnamese coast. Aboard it was a young sailor named Doug Hegdahl, barely out of his teens. Now, here's where things get strange. On the morning of April 6th, 1967, Doug stepped out onto the deck for a breath of fresh air. Just a regular moment, till it turned into the start of a nightmare. According to some accounts, he leaned over to retrieve his hat. Others claim the blast from a nearby missile launch knocked him off balance. Either way, Doug ended up overboard, splashing into the Gulf of Tonkin as his ship cruised ahead, completely unaware that he had vanished. Can you imagine that moment? No one heard him fall, no distress call, no lifeboat, just open sea, the rising sun. In silence, Doug managed to stay afloat for hours, probably wondering whether he'd be shark food before anyone even realized he was gone. But fate had other plans. Later that day, a boat appeared on the horizon. North Vietnamese fishermen pulled him from the water. Enemy fishermen. In a war zone. Here's the unexpected twist. They didn't kill him. They rescued him. They offered him food. Spoke gently. Showed compassion despite knowing he was an enemy sailor. In a war where brutality was often the norm, these fishermen chose humanity. It's one of those rare moments in history that reminds us, even in war, mercy can still exist. But this was just the beginning of Doug's ordeal. Soon after, Doug was turned over to North Vietnamese soldiers. His life took a darker turn. He was thrown into the Ho Lo prison, better known by its infamous nickname, the Hanoi Hilton. It was a notorious POW camp where American prisoners were beaten, interrogated, and subjected to brutal conditions. Now, most men would have broken Doug. He chose a different path. When asked to play dumb, when asked to sign a false confession, he refused. So they beat him, repeatedly. Finally, under duress, he signed. But when they asked him to read it aloud for propaganda, he couldn't, because ... he claimed. He didn't know how to read. He played the part so well, fumbling through tasks, mispronouncing words, staring blankly at documents, that the Vietnamese started calling him the incredibly stupid one. They thought he was harmless. It's a joke, an embarrassment to the US Navy. And that's when Doug started collecting secrets, while pretending to be a bumbling fool. Doug roamed the prison grounds freely. He talked with fellow prisoners, piecing together their names, ranks, capture dates, and details of their treatment. One by one, he memorized them, not on paper, not in code, but to the tune of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. Yes, seriously. He turned war intel into a nursery rhyme. Imagine the enemy walking by as Doug sings to himself, with a POW here and a POW there. Little did they know he was compiling national intelligence with every verse. Doug memorized the identities of 256 fellow prisoners, even recounting the exact layout of the prison and the locations of torture. But he still had to escape. And that opportunity came ironically because of his stupidity. In 1969, 2 years after his capture, the Vietnamese decided to release a few prisoners as a public relations stunt. They wanted to show the world how well they treated their captives. Of course, they chose Doug. Why? Because he was too dumb to matter. But oh, how wrong they were. Doug returned home and immediately debriefed US military intelligence. His information exposed war crimes, torture, and provided proof of life for hundreds of posts whose families had no idea if they were still alive. Doug Hegdahl became a living archiver walking database who outsmarted one of the most brutal prison systems in the war, and he did it without a gun, without rank, and without anyone suspecting he was even capable of remembering a grocery list, let alone hundreds of prisoners. Today, Hegdahl's story isn't as famous as other Vietnam War legends. He didn't win medals for combat. He didn't storm a battlefield. He didn't fire a single shot. But what he did do was outwit an entire enemy prison, armed with nothing but his memory and his nerve. So the next time someone tells you that brains don't matter in war, tell them about Doug Hegdahl, the sailor who played dumb and became one of the most valuable assets in US POW history, because sometimes the biggest weapon is underestimated intelligence, and sometimes the man who appears to be the fool's the one who's playing everyone else.